Good afternoon. My name is Monty Sharma, and I'm the chapel director at our college. I would now like to invite our college principal, Jan Royall, for the opening reflection of this year's Commemoration Service.
Friends, a very warm welcome to this Commemoration Service. Let us reflect on the values, history and benefactors that have shaped our college. Somerville was founded on a promise to offer opportunities for those women who'd been denied them. Let us hope that our college, our university, will continue unswervingly to honour that promise by striving to give opportunities to students of all backgrounds and of all faiths and none who would excel and flourish here. Tolerance, charity and respect are at the heart of what it means to be a Somervillian. Above the doors of our chapel reads the phrase, "A house of prayer for all peoples." Let us wish that this building and this college is always a place of reflection, safety and creativity for those who pass through our doors. And let us hope that courage and generosity remain always at the forefront of our deeds. Somerville's existence is the product of the pioneering vision and courage of our founders. The persistent determination of these women and men to advance the higher education of women created this place of learning and environment. We remember and thank them now. John Percival, Rachel Vernon Harcourt, Mary Ward, Henry Pelham, Thomas Hill Green, George Kitchen and John McGrath. When this college was founded, there were just 12 students living in a single building and attending lectures in a room above a baker's shop. Through the support of our benefactors, Somerville grew rapidly to take its rightful place among the colleges of Oxford, making a powerful case for women's education. The continuing generosity of our benefactors has allowed us to further expand our efforts to honour our educational purpose, support our students and give opportunities to those who have been denied them to realise their talent and academic potential. You may find a full list of benefactors at the end of the order of service, the most recent being Catherine Hughes, Christina Rofe, Elsie Brazel, Ruth Thompson, Jane Abdi, Robert Lloyd, Margaret Stewart, Gillian Falconer, Sheila Porter and Elizabeth Goulding. We also thank those who wisely governed the college or taught within its walls for their dedication and their service. You may find a full list of those individuals at the end of the order of service, the most recent being Fiona Caldicott, Anna Monpergo Davis, Christina Rofe, Miriam Griffin, Jane Kister and Jane Hands. Finally, we reflect on all those Somervillians who have died. We take inspiration from their lives and their achievements, and we offer our condolences to those who mourn their loss. These women have been the lifeblood of this college. May they rest in peace, but they will live on in the memory and in the history of Somerville. Please let us say together the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
When great trees fall, rocks on distant hills shudder. Lions hunker down in tall grasses, and even elephants lumber after safety. When great trees fall in forests, small things recoil into silence, their senses eroded beyond fear. When great souls die, the air around us becomes light, rare, sterile. We breathe briefly. Our eyes briefly see with a hurtful clarity. Our memory, suddenly sharpened, examines, gnaws on kind words unsaid, promised walks never taken. Great souls die, and our reality, bound to them, takes leave of us. Our souls, dependent upon their nurture, now shrink, wizened. Our minds, formed and informed by their radiance, fall away. We are not so much maddened as reduced to the unutterable ignorance of dark, cold caves. And when great souls die, after a period, peace blooms, slowly and always irregularly. Spaces fill with a kind of soothing electric vibration. Our senses, restored, never to be the same, whisper to us. They existed. They existed. We can be and be better, for they existed.
is inevitably an element of sadness in any commemorative event. I'm sure that everyone here will agree with me that there is something very cheering in being able, after a long period of distancing, to come together in person to celebrate the lives of Somervillians who died during the last year, or in some cases a little longer ago. I use the word celebrate very deliberately. As you are all aware, we are currently living in very anxious and unstable times, when many conflicts in the world, in Ukraine of course, but also in other places, appear to threaten the peace and security that we, living in a relatively stable first world country, have grown to accept as normal, as well as threatening supplies of food and other basic needs for millions of people on a global scale. Closer to home are very many worrying problems as people struggle to afford food, fuel, and the essentials of life, and the allocation of resources seems inequitable. I believe it would be wrong not to mention these things today, as we talk about a group of typically noteworthy Somervillian women. And they are all women, because all the ones we're talking about today were over the age of 70 when they died. So this group comprises generations of women who, like I myself, knew Somerville only as a woman's college. Of course, a lot of men could always be found in Somerville, but only after 10 o'clock in the morning. As a historian, I know there's never been a time wholly free from conflict. And crisis, famine, forced migration, economic difficulties are nothing new. At any point in time, certainly during the period when the women we commemorate today were living, there are people saying the world had never known such a dangerous time. Life had never been so difficult. I do personally think the current situation particularly volatile, most particularly in terms of the threat of the use of nuclear weapons, and of course the whole world faces a major threat from accelerating climate change. But the reason that I'm beginning my address with these rather sober notes is that I think that in this uncertain context, it is even more instructive and indeed uplifting to consider the lives of the women that we are remembering today. It has always been a characteristic of Somervillians to live life to the full, to question the status quo, to try to improve the situation where possible, to search for new horizons and new information for as long as they live. However difficult their lives may have been, however uncertain the times in which they found themselves, these characteristics are surely something worth celebrating, especially during otherwise dark days. And I regard this as my, indeed our, purpose today. Of the 41 women whose names you have in your order of service, 15 were over the age of 90 when they died. This means that they lived through the Second World War, which many said had left an indelible impression on them, even if they were very young. Even those in succeeding generations, including my own, received strong memories of that war from their parents and relatives. We now live in a period when even the grandparents of some of today's students may well not remember the war in any way, something that can sometimes produce a lack of perspective with devastating consequences. To many young people today, the problems that pressed so strongly upon the women we are remembering, whether it was the threat of conflict and opposing ideologies of what we now call the Cold War, the enforced division of Europe, or apartheid in South Africa, seem often utterly incomprehensible to younger people, unbelievable. But these things were part of the experience of everyone we commemorate today. And for many, later conflicts like the war in Vietnam had a strong influence on their lives and views. Just like today's Somervillians, female and male, they have been passionate in pursuing causes. And reading about the lives of those we're commemorating reveals that one of their strong common threads is passion for their subject, sometimes, for nature, wildlife, music, frequently, for friendship, very often, for justice and the improvement of society, always. Of course, this group did have experience of some more positive developments, such as, for example, the institutions set up after the Second World War, the United Nations and all its associated bodies, the expansion of the welfare state here in Britain, extraordinary scientific discoveries, and of course the expansion of higher education, offering the opportunities and, crucially, grants to students from all backgrounds. Somervillians have always been eager to grasp opportunities with both hands, to campaign for justice and greater equality, to protest against what they perceive to be wrong in the world. My late mother always used to complain that Somerville made me think I could do anything. She meant it as a criticism, but I've always considered it an unalloyed benefit of being at Somerville, and I have no doubt that the women we commemorate today felt the same. Indeed, many of them spoke of their time at Somerville as one of the best periods in their lives. Enough of the general, now for the particular. Now, it would, as I'm sure you realise, be impossible in this short address to give full details of the careers and lives of all the women we commemorate. In some cases, very little information is available. I will try to mention as many as I can, particularly those whose relatives and friends are here today, but I will hope you will all forgive me if I leave something out or get things wrong. You will also note that when talking about these women, in contrast to the listing in your order of service, I'm going to put first the name that they used when they first came up to Somerville. After all, when we all met our friends and fellow students, we referred to them by whatever name they were using at the time. A few facts and figures. 41 women, the youngest 72, the eldest 99 when they died, all notable and many extraordinary. Since I found it difficult to decide in what order I might mention them, I've decided to group them more or less by the subjects they studied, which is rather what we used to do. I don't know if you had the same experience. We used to say, you know, that girl down the hall who's a medic, or you get the impression. The exception to my rule will be Susan Partridge, who did not study at Somerville, but was the college secretary from 1978 to 1992, and is remembered fondly for dispensing biscuits and tissues in particular, I'm informed. The most popular subject for the Somervillians we are commemorating was English, which 10 of them studied. 7 scientists, chemistry, physiology and zoology, 7 modern linguists, 1 a joint honours with music, 6 historians, plus 1 who took a B.Lit, 4 Red Greats, plus a D.Phil student, and 2 each for PPE and maths. Just 1, Claire Lucas, later Claire Tomlinson, wrote Agriculture and Forest Sciences, a subject with a very ecological ring. Perhaps an appropriate subject for a woman called the greatest female polo player of all time, an all-round sportswoman, the first woman ever to play in a varsity match, though she had to be listed as Mr. Lucas, and later with her husband establishing the Beaufort Polo Club in Gloucestershire, where she bred ponies as well as coaching elite polo players. Of our classicists, 2, Marion Nelson and Marilyn Wright, later Woodside, came up together to read Greats in 1960, forming, together with Anne Vernon, later Seton, who was already here, a trio of girls born in the Isle of Man and taught by a very eccentric but clearly effective classics teacher at Douglas High School called Mr. Villa. Marion had a varied career, ranging from working as a tax inspector, 22 years with Granada Television, and she later made programmes with her partner Rob Rohrer. In retirement, she studied Italian and then decided to launch her into complete career change, another typical Somervillian characteristic, with an MSc in biology and physiology and then a PhD in evolutionary psychology. After Rob's death, Marion moved back to the Isle of Man, where she took a keen interest in Manx history and language. Her friend Marilyn Wright pursued a distinguished career as an archaeologist, specialising in prehistoric Minoan and Mycenaean Greek architecture, spending a great deal of time in Greece on digs. Like Marion, in later life she returned to the Isle of Man, where she devoted herself to Manx archaeology and language, and pursuing her other passion, playing the piano on historic instruments that she collected. We also remember Jane Osborne, later Day, and Carol Bentz, later Carol Holmes, who came to Somerville in 1967 to take a DPhil in classics. Sarah Waterlow, later Professor Sarah Brodie, OBE, also came up in 1960 to read greats, where she became a friend of the philosophers Elizabeth Anscombe and Philippa Foot. Sarah herself became an eminent ancient philosopher and historian of Greek thought, who taught at Edinburgh, where she met her husband, Frederick Brodie, and also at University College London, where, at the time of her death, she was still Keeling Scholar in Residence. She also taught in the United States at Yale, Rutgers, Princeton, and the University of Texas at Austin. Author of many renowned works on philosophy, Professor Brodie was made an honorary fellow of Somerville in 2005, and among the comments posted after her death were two that seem particularly fitting: a magnificent scholar and a fine human being, and the epitome of a philosophy tutor, disagreeing with everything I said just for the sake of it. Elizabeth Cameron, better known as Elspeth Barker, came up in 1958 to read modern languages, but, according to one of her obituaries, fell asleep in her finals, failed to turn up for the resit, and went down without taking her degree, although she clearly made good use of her time at Somerville, making many friends and learning enough to teach languages and indeed classics. She led a life of what you might call great variety and vigour, teacher, journalist, and finally novelist, publishing in 1991 O Caledonia, described as the best, least known novel of the 20th century. At the age of 22, she began a long relationship with the poet George Barker, with whom she had 5 children, and lived what her obituary described as a life of old Bohemia, considerable chaos and constant visitors. She sounds a most characterful woman, and I'm sure that her daughters, who may be here today, have many wonderful memories of her. Another linguist, Pat Mears, later Pat Beasley, came up in 1945. She spent much of her career at the Council of Europe, where she met her husband Hugh. Theirs is a truly European family. Its members spread through Germany, Switzerland, France, Belgium, Norway, and the UK, and Portugal, which was where Pat retired. Rhiannon Davis came up in 1961 to read music and French. Though she taught French for a while, her first love was singing, and she studied at the Gill School of Music before developing a career in publishing, working for many years editing course materials for the Open University. Unfortunately, Rhiannon suffered with chronic fatigue syndrome and had to take early retirement in 1994. She wrote of that experience that it required a lot of thinking round problems I could have solved physically had I been able, and she noted her experience of how disabled people are treated. For example, she said, filling in benefit forms is always a nightmare. We also remember Virginia Fasnage and Francisca Garvey, who came up to read modern languages in 1958 and 1961, respectively, and Patricia Ibbotson, who came up in 1944 and spent her career working in the civil service for an examining body, on retirement fulfilling her dream by embarking on a degree in art. Gillian Gaisford, later Saunders, came up in 1951 to read modern languages and spent most of her career in teaching. When her husband sadly died early, she threw herself into charitable work connected with her love of nature, with the Kent Wildlife Trust and the RSPB and musical activities. Her daughter writes that her life was well lived with many joys and much happiness. Dora Birch, later Dora Rose, read mathematics and said her time at Somerville was the best time of her life. A lifelong campaigner for women's rights and women's education, she brought up 3 young children as a single mother and, her daughter writes, had to leave Thailand by river in the middle of the night because women were not allowed to travel except on their husbands' passports. Dora taught maths for over 30 years in Harrow, Singapore and Thailand, and as head of maths at Ribston Girls' Grammar School in Gloucester. Her daughter says she was hugely fulfilled by teaching and continued coaching and doing Sudoku right up to her death. We also remember Daphne Perry, who came to read maths in 1952. Of those reading English, we remember Marigold Phillips, later Marigold Freeman Atwood, who came up in 1941, and Enid Lancaster, later Enid Wason, I don't know whether it's Wason or Wasson, I apologise to the family, who came in 1947. Elizabeth Wright, later Vice, came up in 1948, and she was one of those who noted the profound effects a wartime childhood had upon her. After Somerville, she moved to London as a journalist, writing for magazines such as House Beautiful. She had a strong interest in design. But struck forcibly by the discrimination she observed in housing and other areas, she became a lifelong campaigner for anti-racism and social justice, including running for many years the Pepper Pot Community Club in North Kensington, which was set up in the early 1980s to support retired members of the African Caribbean community. In the 1990s, she took an MA in post-colonial literature at the Open University and embarked on creative writing projects of her own. Mary Barnett, later Dixon, who came up in 1949 to read English, worked for a while in the Foreign Office before pursuing a teaching career. A nice detail, in 2013, she told a Somervillian telethon caller that she'd been lectured to by J.R.R. Tolkien in her time here, and that Shirley Williams used to get spiders out of the bath for her. Celia Clout, who came up in 1951, also pursued a career in teaching, firstly in London and then in the Peak District, where in retirement she became trustee of an educational trust. Her contemporary, Lucia Glanville, later Lucia Turner, came up on a clothworker scholarship and after taking a B.Lit embarked upon an academic career, teaching firstly at King's College London and in Oxford at Lady Margaret Hall. Later, when her husband became a non-stipendiary minister in the Church of England, she threw herself wholeheartedly into all aspects of parish life. We remember Barbara Marshall, later Britton, who came up in 1953 to read English, as did Anne Havens, later Fuller. Juliet Ricketts, later Juliet Quick, came up in 1955 and taught English throughout her career. She and her husband Andrew moved their family to the United States, to the beautiful coastal city of Virginia Beach, where she carried on teaching English, including as assistant professor at Hampton University. In retirement, Juliet travelled the world as a medical records clerk for the charity Operation Smile, and also spent time in Italy restoring 12th century flats in Tuscany. See another typical Somervillian here. In Virginia, she was an active member of many societies, and an obituary in the local press noted her hobbies as Shakespearean theatre, Jane Austen novels, and independent cinema. Passionately keen on women's education, she had friends worldwide, A wonderfully wise person with a great sense of humour is one description. We also remember Harriet Levine, later Fishman, who came up to read English in 1961. Jean Stenier, later Veletsky, the oldest of those we are commemorating today, came up to read physiology during the war in 1941 and afterwards went to Germany with a Medical Research Council mission studying malnutrition. Later, she worked in the biochemistry department at the University of Oxford before spending many years working at the radiological unit, the Atomic Energy Authority at Harwell. Jean then became an MRC research fellow at the University of Southampton, where her husband, Lubor Veletsky, who had come to the UK from Czechoslovakia at the time of the communist coup in 1948, lectured in philosophy. Both were active in the Southampton Orienteering Club, and in 2014, Jean was interviewed by BBC Radio Solent on a recent victory in the British Orienteering Championships. The club made a special presentation to her when she was still taking part at the age of 90. We remember Cecily Darwin, later Littleton, who came up to read chemistry in 1945, and Gillian Faulkner, later McKee, who came for zoology in 1949. Bridget Davies, who came up to read physiology in 1950, trained as a psychiatrist on graduation, working at Wickham Hospital and at St John's Hospital before moving to Long Crendon in 1971. There she became a key volunteer at the library and pursued her passion for music. An accomplished cellist, she played with string quartets and sang in the local choir. She was also a lifelong member of the Labour Party and lover of nature. We remember Leslie Watson, later Coggins, who came up in 1962 to read zoology. I learned only at lunchtime that she coxed the women's boat in 1965. Thank you to Pauline for that bit of information. Leslie took a PhD in cell biology at Yale University, specialising in electron microscopy, and later returned to the UK with her husband, taking teaching posts at Cambridge and later Glasgow, where in retirement she began a second career setting up a cell biology lab. Linda Champan, who came up in 1968 to read chemistry. Linda's story is one of tremendous determination and activity despite lifelong chronic illness. She trained as a social worker, later working as a nurse and as a psychotherapist. Throughout, Linda made use of her own difficulties to explore innovative health solutions, learning and later teaching others with respiratory problems to manage their conditions. She did her best not to let her health problems stop her from doing whatever she wanted, whether it was playing music, travelling, or hill climbing. Her husband says she was very good at pacing herself and spent her life helping and supporting others. Karen Jane Moffat, born in New Hampshire and brought up on the family farm, came to Somerville in 1949 to read PPE, followed by a master's degree in education. Although she taught in the US for some years, her real passion was for environmental issues, and she turned into a campaigner in that area, particularly for the Long Island Sound Watershed Alliance, and became president of the Audubon Society of Connecticut. Lyndon Moore, who came to read PPE in 1954, spent the first 10 years of her life in India, something that left a lifelong impression. She was an applied economist who wrote many books on British industry, trade, and economic structure, and was a lecturer at the University of Manchester. Finally, we come to the historians. Professor Lalaji Baun, OBE, who came up in 1945, became a highly regarded pioneer of global adult education, who spent most of her career in Africa, particularly Nigeria, where she taught at the University of Ibadan and the Ahmadu Bello University, before taking on the role of Dean in the Faculty of Education at the University of Lagos. Professor Bowen was also founding secretary of the African Adult Education Association, an active participant in the formation of the Nigerian National Council for Adult Education, and editor of 2 Centuries of African English, a 1973 anthology that was groundbreaking at the time in offering students texts by Africans and with African concerns at their heart. She returned to the UK in 1981 as head of the Adult and Continuing Education Department at the University of Glasgow, and was recognised with honorary professorships at the University of Warwick and University of London, though I learned at lunchtime that she actually had 6 honorary doctorates, and I don't know what they all were, but you get the picture. Professor Bowen always said it was at Somerville where she acquired an appreciation for resilience, which she regarded as integral to the ethos and values of the college. We also remember Elizabeth Baldwin, later Fortescue Hitchens, who came up in 1946, and Susan Hopkinson, later Lady Susan Chitty, who came in the following year. Susan Hopkinson was one of the daughters of the novelist Antonia White and married Thomas Chitty, who was the novelist Thomas Hind. Her obituary in The Pendant began, "She was born into trouble and kept a nodding acquaintance with it throughout her life." The author of a number of biographies, Lady Chitty's life was rarely free from controversy. Jane Eyre, later Jane Gibbs, who came to read history in 1954, had a peripatetic and adventurous childhood and rather disjointed education, but she threw herself into life at Oxford, and as a warm and empathetic personality, made a very wide circle of friends. On graduating, she married the film critic of the Daily Telegraph and travelled the world with him, bringing up 3 children on the way. Her obituary said that the hallmark of Jane was that she got on with everybody, from a brief shop assistant or restaurant waiter encounter to the staff at her care home, to her English as a foreign language Berlitz students, to her lifelong friends and family. We also remember Anne Hanson, who came to Somerville to read for a B.Lit in history in 1958, and Barbara, known as Cordy Collins, later Cordy McNeill, in 1962. Cordy joined the Foreign Office on graduating, working in the Information Research Department. Actually, as a specialist in intelligence history myself, I know quite a lot about that semi-clandestine department of the Foreign Office, and you can ask me about it later. At that time, of course, when Cordy McNeill was in it, you had to resign on marriage. If you got married in the Foreign Office, you were a woman, you had to leave. So she threw her energies into her family, taught English as a foreign language, and was a trained counsellor. Cathy King, born in the United States, came to Somerville as Mary Ewart Junior Research Fellow from 1973 to 5. She had earlier been in Oxford beginning a DPhil at St Hilda's, but she didn't pursue that, and it was not till 14 years later that she came back to pursue her real passion, numismatics. She had apparently a large, friendly Samoyed dog called Tamburlaine, who had to be kept in lodgings outside college, although Cathy, with her friends, regularly went to take him for walks. Later, she taught classical civilizations, but it is noted that for her, Roman coins were both her work and the major interest of her life. It's clear from what I've said that all the Somervillians that we are remembering today lived very rich, full and useful lives, pursuing their passions, supporting their partners, families and friends. I am sorry that time does not permit a fuller account of all their achievements, but I'm sure you would agree with me that we must surely celebrate as well as commemorating their lives.
We are gathered together at Somerville today to remember and give thanks for those members of our Somerville community who have recently died after lives filled with determination, love and service. They are Elspeth Barker, Patricia Beasley, Lalage Bown, Sarah Brodie, Barbara Britton, Susan Chitty, Celia Clout, Leslie Coggins, Bridget Davies, Rhiannon Davies, Jane Day, Mary Dixon, Virginia Fasnage, Harriet Fishman, Elizabeth Fortescue Hitchens, Marigold Freeman Atwood, Anne Fuller, Francisca Garvey, Jane Gibbs, Anne Hanson, Carol Holmes, Patricia Ibbotson, Catherine King, Cicely Littleton, Cordy McNeil, Gillian Mackey, Jane Karen Moffat, Lyndon Moore, Marion Nelson, Susan Partridge, Daphne Perry, Juliet Quick, Dora Rose, Gillian Saunders, Linda Champon, Claire Tomlinson, Lucia Turner, Jean Velicky, Elizabeth Weiss, Enid Wasson, Marilyn Woodside. May they rest in peace. Their example reminds us that we all are privileged to be members of this Somerville community. Like those who went before us, we, who have benefited so much from our education here, have a duty to work to share those benefits with others and the wider world. Let us resolve together to uphold this most Somervillian of values, and in doing so, honour their lives.
This
Please let us all say together, May the Lord meet in mercy all who seek him, and comfort those who suffer and mourn. And may the Lord give his people of every land and of every tongue the blessing of peace. Amen.